Ding.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to the House Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee here on this lovely Wednesday, January 11th. It is a little brisk outside, but we are cozy here in room 10. This morning, we are going to have introductions from a few folks who their organizations are typical stakeholders, collaborators of our committee, and they'll probably have some feedback and input for us on the committee bill we've been working on about open meeting, remote authority extensions, and town meeting day ballot and date flexibility. So with that, I would like to welcome Carol Dawes, who's joining us remotely, who is here with the Vermont Municipal Clerk and Treasurers Association. So Carol, welcome. I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your organization.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. I know I'm not there in person, but I can see you're in a much larger room. How nice. Room to spread out. I'm Carol Dawes. I'm the Berry City Clerk and Treasurer, and I've been in office for about 15 years here in Berry City. And I'm the chair of the legislative committee for the Clerk and Treasurers Association. We work very closely with your House committee and with your Senate counterpart committee on a number of different things legislatively throughout the years. We've worked on fee bills, we've worked on land records, vital records, and of course elections is one of our the big categories that we work on. We work very closely with the Secretary of State's office and with the League of Cities and Towns, moving forward various bills, and we also work closely with other stakeholders, with representatives from the Bar Association, the attorney title corporations, realtors. We have had really successful collaborations with a number of different organizations, and we look forward to the beginning of this new biennium. I have worked with some of you in the past, but quite a few of you are new to me, and I want to throw my virtual doors open. I'm always available for phone calls, for emails. Happy to communicate at any time. So I don't know if you have any quick questions to me specifically about me or the organization, but then I'm happy to talk to you about the bill that you're working on right now.
Thanks so much, Carol. I guess I will use the chair's prerogative and start and just ask if there are specific legislative priorities, things that, generally buckets of policy where clerks and treasurers would like us to, keep an eye on things, need to take action in this biennium that you'll be watching.
A few things that are on sort of our wish list. Where we understand certainly at the moment your priority is on this very timely bill, and we support it. I do have a few notes I want to offer. We have a few election related items. We think that there's some tweaking that needs to be done to the mail ballot legislation that went into effect for last November's general election. As I said, we work closely with the Secretary of State's office, and I met with Will Senning, the Director of Elections, earlier this week to talk about things. They're not emergent because the next general election isn't until 24, so they don't have to be addressed immediately. They could be done this year, the biennium, or next year. So we're working on figuring out what those changes might look like. We're working with the property valuation and review out of the tax department about some changes in the retention schedules and the way the language exists right now around grand lists. Property grand lists. At the moment, everything in statute refers to an abstract grand list. And with the the advent of computers, as it were, most town offices, if not all of them, now do things electronically, and we don't have a big hard copy book of the grand list that has all its changes in it. That's the way it used to be, and so it made sense to keep the grand list in our vaults in perpetuity. Now what happens is we print an abstract and a sort of an early draft, and then it's replaced by a final version. But based on a reading of the statute, we're still required to keep both the draft and the finalized version in our vaults in perpetuity. Would be nice to clean that up so that we can free up some vault space. And as I said, we're working with property valuation and review on some proposed language. Not sure whether it will be able to come forward this year or not, but that's on our plate. There's an interest in having clerks added to the list of people who can perform marriages. Right now, we're not on that list, and yet we frequently get people who come into the office to buy marriage licenses who would like to have them solemnized right there in the office. At the moment, we can't do that. So there's some interest in having that done. I think that would be a relatively simple and non-controversial change to the statute. So those are certainly some of the things that are on our lists at the moment.
Great. Does anybody else on the committee have questions for Carol about the role of the municipal clerks and treasurers generally? Great. So, Carol, do you have time to stick with us this morning, or are you in a hurry to jump off to other things?
What kind of time are we talking about?
Maybe for the next 45 minutes or so. What our plan is on our agenda is to hear brief introductions from your organization, the League of Cities and Towns, Regional Planning Commission, and I would love for folks to be able to hear each other's feedback or input into our bill, so that if there's the need for somebody to say, Mr. Chair, yes, that, but no, this, I'd love to have some of that cross-pollination happening quickly because of the urgency around the deadline. So if you wanted to maybe give your notes on the bill now and then stick around for other folks' testimony, I think that might be valuable if you have the ability to stay for the next 45 minutes or so.
Yep, I can certainly do that. One thing I do want to add with regards to the organization, we're a membership organization, and we have members that represent about half of the towns in the state. Not every clerk in the state is a member. And I just want to make sure that you understand that we obviously speak for our members, but I do have relationships with clerks that are not members, and we do try to include them in discussions and when we're gathering information from clerks about how they feel about particular legislation. So I just want to let you know that I speak for the organization, but you will likely hear from your own clerks or other clerks at the same time. So with regards to the proposed legislation, we support the idea of the permanent extension associated with the open meeting law and the virtual meetings. That certainly has been a boon for participation over the last couple years, allowing people to feel safe and participate in their communities, both on the city council level, select board level, but also on other municipal committees. So we support that. We definitely support the option to move town meeting dates. That's has less of an impact on a community like Berry City, where we do everything by Australian ballot, and will continue to hold our meetings on town meeting day with various measures in place to provide plenty of safety for voters who are coming. We obviously encourage as many people to vote early and by mail as possible to reduce the number of people at the polls. But those communities that do have public open town meetings, having the opportunity to move to a different date is certainly advantageous. The only concern that we see is the fact that we want to make sure everybody understands that if this extension is moved to runs all the way to July 1 of 24, which is what the current proposal is. That does mean through the March 2024 town meeting timeframe, which is also the date of the presidential primary. So regardless of whether a community moves its March 2024 town meeting, they will have to hold the presidential primary on that first Tuesday in March, which will have to be an Australian ballot election. So I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of that. Obviously, communities don't have to move their dates, but they will have to hold that election regardless.
That is a great piece of feedback for us. So, Carol, I think I made it pretty clear in our discussions yesterday that the intention of this legislation was to get us through this town meeting day and sort of see our way through the entire biennium so that we would have some breathing room to take feedback like that and incorporate a more inclusive and thoughtful process than we can do in a couple of days. About the future of remote meeting and how much flexibility we want to give towns on town meeting day changes. And I'm wondering if is your concern or the position of the VMCTA that you support the bill but just want us to be aware of the presidential primary, or do you feel like we need to address that in this language now?
No, we completely support the bill because it opens up options, and anytime we can give more options to individual communities, that's definitely beneficial. I just want to make sure that we're not sort of an out of sight, out of mind approach that, gee, the presidential primary in 24 seems like a long ways off. But I want to make sure that everybody's aware that there will have to be an election, an Australian ballot election on that date regardless.
That is a really important flag. Thank you. Anything else for us on the bill before we move on? And I would definitely invite you to stay in the room, the Zoom room, Carol.
Yep. Nothing else from me, but I'm happy to stay and listen and interject politely if something comes up.
Great. Thank you so much for giving us your time this morning. Great. So now I would like to invite Karen and Gwen, would you like to come up together?
Yeah.
Yeah, please. Do we have?
Pull over another chair?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Can you email them to me later?
Sure, yeah, just.
I will say for we're still working on establishing committee norms, but I really am trying to be a very, very low paper committee. So for anybody who is testifying, I'll say this on the record probably a lot in the next week or two, definitely send us PDFs to our committee assistant and we'll get those put in prior to testimony. I'm on our electronic devices.
Duly noted.
Great.
Yeah. So thank you very much for the opportunity. My name's Karen Horn. I'm Director of Public Policy and Advocacy for the League of Cities and Towns. And this is Gwen Zakov, who's our Municipal Policy Advocate. Between us, we have about 110 years of experience in the legislature. So if you have any questions about local government at all, please feel free to ask us. We did want to give you just a little background on what VLCT is before we move to the actual bill that you're considering right now. We're the association of all the cities and towns in Vermont. That's now 247 because Essex Junction is a city. Thank you, from last year. And we represent all those cities and towns on any issue that affects local government that comes up in the legislature. During the course of a session, that's generally about 300 bills, and that's because Vermont is a Dillon's Rule state. So you'll hear that a lot from us, Dillon's Rule. And what that means is that a municipality needs to have authority expressed in the statutes in order to undertake any action. And if you haven't given them permission in the statutes to do whatever it is that they're contemplating doing, then they have to come to you and seek permission. And generally speaking, how that happens is that a town will come to you with a charter change, a governance charter change, and ask for permission, for instance, to adopt a local option tax, or to address firearms, just to get right to one of the hot topics. But Burlington has had that proposal for a charter change for some years. So that's just really the highest level of interactions that we have with the legislature. And we spend a lot of time in government operations because you are the committee of jurisdiction for all those kinds of issues. If you've got a minute to look at our municipal priorities, we are certainly very concerned about housing issues. They probably won't start in your committee, but a lot of the bills that are under consideration address zoning changes and other changes to municipal bylaws. We're very concerned about municipal capacity to raise the funding necessary to actually provide governance at the local level. And right now we have access to the property tax, except for 25 towns that have permission to adopt local option taxes. So that's a big issue that we're hoping to discuss with the legislature, probably Ways and Means first, but eventually I'm sure would come to you as well. And then the most immediate issue, of course, is the open meeting and town meeting legislation that you're considering right now. And I'm going to turn it over to Gwen to talk about that bill specifically.
Thank you.
Thank you. And one more thing, we will be in the State House a fair amount. Our sense is that you don't always want people in the committee, given your room capacity, but we're always happy to respond to any questions or issues that you have.
Hello, committee. Gwen Zakoff for the record. So I'll talk about the bill that the committee has been reviewing the last 24 plus hours. Representative Hango had a question about where this sort of came from. I think the response from the chair was pretty appropriate. The league has heard from dozens of towns who are interested in inquiring about flexible measures for their upcoming town meeting. As happens quite often, elections sort of take center stage, and it's not until after elections that reality hits and towns are sort of finalizing their budgets and realizing pending deadlines around the corner that are actually the first warning for town meeting is the 26th of January. And they were hearing from a lot of their constituents and a lot of Vermonters in their communities who were interested in pursuing options that have been made available during COVID to either move dates, apply Australian ballot, or hold informational meetings in a remote setting. In our priorities, this has not been one of our priorities. Our open meeting law, making that a permanent change for remote meetings, is a priority of ours, but we are pursuing these temporary changes for town meeting day because we're trying to be the voice of our local governments. So we support the bill as written for obvious reasons. The first section that relates to the town meeting provisions, the I think it's important to note that under Title 17, where state law dictates how town meetings or annual meetings at the municipal level are run, it is very inflexible currently in terms of how towns can move town meeting day. Essentially, they can move it to 5 other days other than the first Tuesday of March. It's very inflexible. It certainly doesn't allow towns to move it to a spring date, which might be more amenable to an outdoor meeting, which my town does have when we've moved our town meetings to May. So that would probably be something that we would be pursuing as a change later down the road, certainly not this year, but considering whether or not it really makes sense to have such tight restrictions on such a date. But for sure, temporarily for this coming year and potentially into next year, as it is written for 2024, we support it, essentially because the state law doesn't allow for it. The other provision to highlight is the informational meetings that are held before town meeting, those hearings where towns that hold Australian ballot votes are able to essentially present their information to the voters before they actually go to the ballot or to the town hall to vote. Under state law, there is language that's relatively restrictive on how those are held. It's not really held under the open meeting law standards. Tucker explained yesterday when there's more specific laws, they are the ones that control. So in this instance, that controls, and there's really no capacity, there's no capabilities for towns to hold remote informational meetings because it doesn't allow it in statute. So that's why this is so very important, especially when you have large groups of individuals joining together, and a lot of our communities have very, very, very small buildings in which to meet.
One of the things that we talked about yesterday too is about the participation in those informational meetings being a lot higher when there's at least a remote option. So has that been a pretty universal experience across most of the communities? Absolutely.
I think that's indicative of any time. As you probably have seen from folks tuning into your YouTube channel remotely and testifying remotely, it's just been a complete game changer for communities to be able to use Teams and Zoom meetings to run meetings, and including the informational meetings. And when advertised far and wide, participation definitely increases exponentially compared to prior years. That's at least, I mean, we don't have explicit data, but I'm certain if you talk to select boards and town clerks, that will be the feedback that you hear. So the last provision of the bill that deals with Australian ballots, this is the one provision of the bill that we support, but we will not fall on our sword over. The reason being is the ability to move to Australian ballot voting is something that's already in statute. Towns have the ability to have their voters vote to move to Australian ballot. I think our opinion at the League has been that if the legislature has vested that authority into the voters, that it should remain with the voters. And you don't want to keep extending that out year after year. I think there should be an exception because things are so touch and go at the moment, and individuals and communities have expressed real concerns about floor meetings, and again, like I said, in very small community buildings. But I think, our messaging probably would be moving forward when we're having discussions with our communities is that select boards and town residents really need to have heart-to-hearts and really make decisions about whether or not Australian ballot is the way to go moving forward. So I think we support this provision. It's just that we have a much warmer reception to the idea of being able to move the date of town meeting and the informational meeting, just because there is no capacity to do it, or there's no capability to do it right now because statute doesn't allow it. So that's for the town meeting. We support it and we really appreciate it. Again, the date for that, the warning for town meeting has to happen 40 days before town meeting, which puts it at January 26th. So it is time sensitive, not as time sensitive as the lapse of the open meeting law remote meetings. So second part of the bill is the remote meetings. As you can see from our priority sheet in the little orange block, we As a membership, all of our members, I think it's important to note that our policies and our priorities are voted on by our membership. One vote per town. Every town has a vote. It's incredibly democratic. And during our October annual meeting, when our membership adopted our legislative priority or our legislative policy, they included in it a pretty high on their priority list was allowing for remote meetings to be a permanent fixture of the open meeting law. That is something that we are going to seek next year. We are supporting this bill because we understand that it's a time-sensitive manner, and we want to make sure that communities have access to remote meetings. But this is certainly something that we would like to continue discussions on because of the real value we're seeing in our communities. And I think there's a little bit of a table setting I'd like to especially for the new individuals in this committee, and I believe the Deputy Secretary of State said it yesterday, and just wanted to flesh it out a little bit more, is that I think people lose sight of the fact that the open meeting law applies to every single public body that exists in the state other than the legislature. And obviously the judicial branch is different, but we're not, Karen and I, we're the advocates for local government, and local government being just a subset of towns and cities. We don't even represent gores and villages and school boards and all those folks. But, just doing a back of the napkin sort of math analysis, if you're looking at, let's say, 247 towns, which we represent, and let's say they have about 8 public bodies, which is actually a pretty light load for public bodies. We're looking at 1,976 public bodies in the state that just at the town and city level that have to comply with the open meeting law. And it's important to note that this is not just about select boards and city councils. This is about cemetery commissions, BCAs, DRBs, ZBAs, boards of listers, conservation commissions, energy committees. I mean, the whole litany of statutory public bodies that are created and ones that are created by city councils and select boards. And so the standards are equal for everyone, no matter what workload they're carrying. And so what we've seen with the ability to have remote access is that towns and cities are able to meet their constituents with where they're at. And it's not only helpful for access to the public to come to meetings remotely and safely, it's also helpful for our volunteers that are running these different boards and commissions. Our entire municipal government is run on volunteers, and I don't think that could be understated. And these individuals are running the business of government and running the business of municipalities. And so when they are conducting that business, it's obviously important to have it be transparent and open to the public. But we also need to make sure, if we're going to continue making sure that government at the local level is done at a volunteer basis, that we make accommodations to make it easy for them. When there's pressing needs with their work, with childcare, with elder care, with sickness. I'm the chair of my planning commission. We didn't have to cancel meetings because we were holding them remotely because someone had COVID, but they didn't have to show up and spread COVID. We could still have meetings. I think that the real value of this has been shown, and making sort of a gold standard as always allowing in-person access is it should not be held higher than the access that's been created by allowing for remote meetings and for allowing that flexibility. It's not a mandate. It's not saying you have to. But allowing communities to decide what works best for them. And I think that, at least in my community, I'm sure other communities, you'll see that if the public feels uncomfortable with a decision that's made at the local level about either going fully remote or going fully in person or whatnot, they're going to hear about it. Your select boards and city councils are going to hear about it. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And also noting that, this is less of an issue for local government. It's more of an issue for, I would say, the state, is the sheer fact that the climate impact of people getting into cars and going to meetings. I mean, if we're talking about 1,976, if we're having 8, boards and commissions at the local level, times 5-person, 3-person, 7-person on this meeting, plus people that are attending, we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of car trips that are happening. And this happens a lot more at the state level when you're talking about, like today, I have an EMS advisory board commission meeting at 1:00, and people from the Northeast Kingdom and Brattleboro and Bennington are expected to be go to different districts in the state, and they're driving sometimes 100 miles, 150 miles to attend these meetings. So it just, there's so many benefits that have been represented by allowing remote access, and we're just singing the tune from the town and city level, but I just really think it's important you see it at a global scale in Vermont. And again, we support it as written, and we're really looking forward to having a conversation next year to really flesh this out fully so that when just got here, but on the end of next year, when you're heading home and this bill, assuming it passes and it sunsets on July 1st, hopefully we can get something in place that the state and local governments can benefit from. And we can start codifying an open meeting law standard that meets the needs of 2023 and 2024 and beyond.
Looking forward to doing that work with you all. Representative Chase, I believe, has a question.
1,976.
That was just rough math.
Information about the number of meetings per year across.
So I just did the back. I was just trying to get an idea of like a town that has a planning commission, a select board. That's a minimum. Let's say eight library committee, whatever it is. That's a bare minimum 8. Select board usually has a minimum two a month, right? My planning commission meets once a month, sometimes twice a month if we're on the deadline of getting a town plan adopted or getting its bylaws redone. I would say, on average, a minimum once a month, but I'd say most of these committees are meeting twice a month if they're in larger communities that have more active, especially for zoning and planning and stuff that are more active on their docket where they have more hearings and such.
There's also a number of ad hoc committees that get created by select boards to address particular issues. For instance, there are, I believe, 10 towns that have received wastewater grants from the ARPA dollars. And so there might be an ad hoc committee, as there is in my town, to sort of marshal through getting that wastewater system actually constructed. And a lot of towns have also created ad hoc committees to address the ARPA needs and get input from local folk about what they think the highest priorities for spending ARPA dollars are. So, the number's mushy, but it's high.
35,568 if we assume 1.5 meetings per month.
Good to have a math person around.
Didn't realize we had that many.
We're going to get some good on-committee analysis here, I think. Representative Hooper of Burlington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the open meeting law section, the word fully is stuck in there. What does that mean to you? Elimination of the now cumbersome, somebody has to be in the office in case a member of the public.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure.
Fully remote meetings.
Oh, fully, yeah, sorry. So under the current open meeting law, under the open meeting law, not the temporary provisions, there has I shouldn't say always, in the last at least 2 decades, there's been the ability to meet sort of, I guess, what then was really known as more of a conference call sort of setting, where you could sort of call in as long as there was a quorum of members in person. So that's what the standard is right now. That's the default setting. Our ask would be is that would go away, and that in its place there would be similar provisions that are in front of you where it's allowed to, where there's access from the public and the public and the public body are able to be conducted without a designated physical location being set. So essentially, like a town during the height of COVID, what was happening is that towns were scrambling, trying to figure out how to set up Zoom accounts, how to get the technology, get the laptops, the whole 9 yards. And that's how most meetings were being conducted, was fully remotely in the beginnings of COVID. And some still are, and some aren't. Some are, have more to a hybrid model. The problem with the hybrid model, obviously, is that it's, if you have the technological capacity and if you have the physical capacity in terms of having the room and set up within a building, it's generally not a heavy lift. But in a lot of smaller communities where their town offices are really restrictive, it's really difficult to set up these sorts of meetings. And so it's either most towns at that point either say, well, let's just either hold fully in person, which, in our opinion is sort of cutting off a lot of participation from those who feel more comfortable accessing it remotely, or going fully remote. And that flexibility is key, is in allowing communities to have a choice to do any of those three options, either fully in person, fully remote, or a hybrid of the two.
So right now, the statute, the underlying statute says that one person has to be in a physical location that the public can access. And also during COVID, we heard from several people who drew the short straw and were that person. And they were the only person in an empty building at night that's open to the public where anybody could walk in. And for some people, that was very concerning. So that's another consideration.
So congrats on dragging global warming into the.
Well, it's been, you want to talk about how that was in the Global Warming Solutions Act, sort of one of the.
Well, they did actually, the Climate Council has endorsed fully remote meetings for that reason that we need to reduce or do everything we can to reduce carbon footprints.
That wasn't our idea, we just listened.
First time we've heard it.
Representative Hango.
Thank you for that. I just want to point out the flip side to that. Obviously, human contact is really important, and face-to-face meetings, there's more spontaneity in those meetings than the fully remote ones. Certainly, I applaud your efforts and support this legislation.
As Gwen said, it would be, ideally, it would be an option for municipalities. And we're quite sure that municipalities, when you can have the windows open, when the pandemic's gone, when other considerations are favorable, that they would meet in person, because that's really part of the reason you serve.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you both for joining us and make the same ask of you to hang out just a little bit longer. I do want to prepare the committee and folks who are interested in this bill for one additional item that has come to the attention of Tucker through the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. And I believe this is an item that was brought up by the superintendents and principals who realized that some language that we took up that would suspend the requirement to put some specific ballot language for school budgets on ballots. We suspended that for fiscal years 2025 through 2029, but did not include 2024. So they basically would have to do it, even though we're doing this whole people waiting change. So I just wanted everybody to be aware that Tucker's working on a draft 2.1 that he's going to bring to us that has this one additional piece of expanding or fixing that date requirement. So don't anybody get shocked by new language coming. That'll be coming forward. I don't know if before Gwen and Karen, I let you off the hot seat if you're aware of that issue or have any concerns about the school piece, school budget piece, but that's probably not in your wheelhouse.
No, we got enough in our wheelhouse.
So just from my understanding, so that temporary provision was good through 2023 and then 25 to 29. With an omission for 24.
My understanding that it was 25 through 29 for some reason. I don't understand why it wasn't for 24, but we're going to hear about it. So just preview of coming attractions.
Thank you for saying.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Gwen is going to stay with you. I have to go to a Listers Association meeting. Zooming. Thank you.
So our next witness, and then so we're gonna have Mr. Baker please come join us. Charlie Baker's with the regional planners. I'd like him to talk a little bit about his association, what they do, and on the bill as well. And then we'll have a little bit of summary committee discussion, chance for questions. Then we're going to take a break. Ben Tucker's coming back with us, I believe. Is that correct, Andrew? I want to make sure I've got the keeper of the agenda in the loop. So, Mr. Baker, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Pleasure to be with you this morning. For the record, my name is Charlie Baker. I'm with the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies, which is the state association for regional planning commissions. During the day, I work at the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. And I am hoping to just talk about the open meeting law this morning. I think we're going to be with you tomorrow afternoon to do a longer introduction on the RPCs and what we do. So thank you for that.
I'm remembering now that we had this conversation by email yesterday, but that's in the. Thank you.
And I wanted to, I probably should have applauded at some point during Gwen's testimony, totally agree and second everything she said about municipal governments. Obviously, the RPCs were created to support municipalities, but we are also a municipality of the state. And so every time we form a committee, it's also subject to open meeting law requirements. And so just as entities ourselves, we have a direct interest in the open meeting law and the flexibility and appreciate the options that are in this draft bill right now. And they would be helpful, not only to regional planning commissions, and Gwen kind of mentioned some of them, but other state committees, regional committees, or solid waste districts and water districts and fire districts, and you'll hear from all of them, I'm sure, during the session. But I think all of them would be interested in at least having this option for fully remote meetings, and happy to take any questions on that. I don't really have much more to offer you this morning on this bill.
Does anybody have any questions around regional planning? I feel like sometimes when I've been the last couple of years doing Gov.Ops work, we sort of you're the middle and provide a lot of technical assistance. Could you maybe, Charlie, talk a little bit about the amount of public meetings that go through regional planning? I'm thinking things like tax.
I've done the math. I was trying to do the math in my head quickly.
Yeah, folks might not be aware of just how much public input and public boards and input into state planning.
Yeah,
in your wheelhouse.
So there are 11 regional planning commissions. Each of our towns that we represent range from the smallest regions have 10 towns, Lamoille County, Mount Scottney have 10 towns to 55 towns in the Northeast Kingdom, NVDA. But if you think on average, they're probably around 25 towns per region. So maybe 24. Haven't done that math yet, but and we're meeting probably 10 times a year. I think we probably take a meeting a month or two off, mostly monthly meetings. But that's back to the climate change question about just how many miles are driven from pretty decent distances. I know I have board members, commissioners that are driving 20, 25 miles to get to a board meeting. Like, can we do it remote? So honestly, it has really increased participation, not just from our members, the representatives of the municipalities, but also from the public too. It makes it easier to plug in and participate in the conversation. And then on top of that, we have committees, whether they're dealing with transportation or clean water or energy or housing or just our regional plan. So there's probably 5 or 6 committees in every RPC with, half a dozen or so folks. So, doing the math, 30 times 11 RPCs, it's another 33 times probably 10 a year, another 330 meetings going on there. So it really, I think people probably just be astounded at the level of public engagement that happens in Vermont at all levels of government. And it really is a credit, as Gwen kind of mentioned, those are all volunteers participating in those meetings. And you all probably started your public careers in some similar manner. So it really is a lot of, and we also do participate in state meetings and often municipal committees too. We're participating in and supporting those sometimes as well. So thanks for bringing that up. There's a lot that happens every month to month.
I think some of us have served on tax and I don't know if anybody has been a commissioner on regional planning, but I really value the work that you all do. And one of the really key things, especially in this age of grant money and ARPA dollars, has been the technical assistance you provide to smaller communities that don't have staff to do a lot of grant writing and that kind of work.
Definitely talk more about that tomorrow. That's going to be my first question. Yeah, have any of you served on your RPC? But I was going to save that for tomorrow.
Fantastic. Well, I'm very excited to talk with you and with some of the other folks from your association. Anybody have any questions about our bill, how it affects regional planning? Just wanted to make sure that you all had a chance to weigh in, so I really appreciate you coming down back-to-back days, Charlie.
You do that. Thank you.
Great. And so I think now I'll let Charlie out of the hot seat and open the floor for the committee before we take a break and give Tucker some time to come and join us. I think he's scheduled at 10:15.
Correct. Yep.
So we'll take a break at 10. But any questions, any concerns, anything you heard overnight that you want to weigh in on? Yeah, Representative Higley.
I'd just like to elaborate a little bit on what Representative Hango had talked about. I know through the pandemic, we Zoomed, and what a terrible process that is, in my opinion. And I understand the Climate Council's initiative to look at carbon emissions reductions only, but again, there's a lot more to it than that. You know, even in my small towns, you have to consider the elderly population that isn't very tech savvy. And I think to move to a totally remote atmosphere is not serving them well. And again, I think that personal connection, us here, the ability to talk to each other through lunch, whatever it is, that's huge in my opinion. And so I think there is a weighing issue when it comes to a climate change issue, so to speak, whether or not you're traveling or not, and that personal connection and what it means for the work that we do and that towns do. So I have a real concern with moving totally remotely, and yeah, it's a real concern for me.
So Representative Chase and.
But I agree, there's a lot of people that can't tech, and making sure that there's an accessible option for them is important. I totally hear you. There's a lot of people where the in-person face-to-face is very important, and that's how they function best. There's also a lot of people where remote is how they function best. So making sure that there's the ability to do, you know, what allows the most people to participate in the most ways that work best for them, instead of just locking into one, I think is important.
And I just for framing of the conversation, want to make sure that the bill that we're talking about is a temporary extension of flexibility for all of the boards, commissions, bodies that are subject to open meeting law to meet without a physical location. Some of the meetings that I've had on city council have been, you know, we just have to meet to do some sort of perfunctory, you know, ministerial thing that really doesn't require a lot of collaboration or thought. It's just that we need to approve something so that, you know, a license can get approved or a deal can move to the next step. So there's this one piece of official business where there's not really a lot lost. There are other meetings where I completely agree with Representative Higley's comment. Meetings like we have here in the State House. I had said this on the record a lot in rules. We really lost a lot not being able to have hallway conversations, meals together as legislators. So our longer conversation beyond this initial one is going to be about how do we balance all of these different thoughts, but transportation demand management and not having to drive all the time for every single meeting. I think that flexibility is really important. So Representative Hango, I think you were next. Got a couple of hands popping up, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You stole my thunder. I know was going to say the same thing. This is a temporary measure, and I absolutely support that. I support it going forward into perpetuity as a temporary measure that is voluntary by towns. If the majority of that legislative body wants to meet remotely, I have no problem with that. I think that that's their prerogative to decide how they want to to meet and obviously make it available to the public, because that's the nature of the law. Just anecdotally, I heard what Karen and Gwen said about raising the number of participants by offering a remote option. Interestingly enough, in my 4 little towns, town meeting, informational meetings, it did not change the attendance at all, not one single bit. The same few people attended via Zoom that attended in person. However, other meetings, such as monthly select board meetings and school board member meetings, were much higher attended. Well, I shouldn't say much. They were higher attended than typical because there was a Zoom option. And just personally, for myself, I'm a school board member. I could not attend my school board meetings from January through June if I were here and there were no Zoom options. So I think there's a lot to be offered for all segments of the population. I totally appreciate the climate change discussion, but I do really hold near and dear the fact that we can be here today and meet with each other face to face and have spontaneous conversations in the hallways.
Representative Waters Evans and then Representative Rowicki will be on deck.
Thank you. There was a lively discussion at the select board meeting in Charlotte on Monday night about whether or not town meetings should be remote or in person or some combination thereof. But luckily it's up to the select board and the town clerk to figure that out, and not us, correct? And as far as this bill specifically is concerned, I spoke to the select board chair for what it's worth in Charlotte last night, and he said, as it is right now, it's fully supported. So at least one select board you've got.
Yeah, I think what you'll find a theme that we may hear from Gwen and Karen and the league, that giving power to towns, especially given our Dillon's rule nature, they always want the flexibility typically. Unless it puts them in a jam, but that's a very rare. That's very rare. So that's great. Representative Rowicki.
Thank you, and thanks for the discussion here. I find it lively and really enriches my own perception. And Representative Higley, I feel like I echo your thoughts around Zoom. I've come to understand. For me, Zoom is better than nothing, but not much. And at the same time, I recognize this. Ironically, in my communities, having these options has actually increased participation by elders. I've heard from people who don't drive or don't drive at night who say, this allows me to get in there and do it. And just last thing I want to say is a little bit of a aside to this is the piece about climate. I think it's helpful to put this into the conversation. And I was surprised, last Saturday night, I went to visit the Vermont National Guard in Westminster for night exercises. And topic of climate came up from the soldiers I was there. And I was directed, didn't realize this, to the Department of Defense's webpage on web pages on climate and how they are looking at this as one of the major problems as they move forward as to how to better provide for the defense of our country. So I think it's interesting to see that coming up even there. So thanks.
All right. So Carol, do you have any parting feedback for us before we break?
Yeah, the one thing, it's been mentioned, but I would just reiterate the fact that this is not a mandate. It is an additional tool. And it does give communities and those various bodies options should circumstances arise where an exclusively virtual meeting would serve the committee and the community best. So it's not something that I think everybody agrees that in person certainly has its benefits. But we too have seen here in Berry City, we've seen a huge increase in participation by having hybrid and Zoom meetings. And I think just knowing that we're adding the tool to the toolbox is important.
Great. Well, thank you for being with us. We are going to break until 10, I'm going to call it 10:16 since I want to give everybody 15 minutes. So we will be back. And we also have an additional witness scheduled. Jeff Francis from the Vermont Superintendents Association is going to come in and talk about that.